Roxan frowned in exasperation. Not knowing where to begin, she merely said, "We met by coincidence downstairs." However, Larry looked doubtful. Seeing his expression, Roxan relaxed her brows and said pleadingly, "Anyway, it's not what you think. It's impossible between me and him." She did not want anyone to misunderstand her relationship with Lucian. Seeing her sincerity, Larry smiled gently and stopped pursuing the matter. Instead, he said, "Mr. Lynch is resting upstairs, and Mr. Ziegler is keeping him company. They're waiting for you. Are you looking for them?" Roxan had been searching for them the entire day, but to no avail. As soon as she heard Larry's words, she heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. "Where are they? Can you please take me to them? I've got something important to discuss with Mr. Ziegler, and I need to apologize to Mr. Lynch." Larry gladly agreed. He brought her out of the banquet hall and headed upstairs. At the same time, Lucian watched them leave, looking deadpan. Rage was boiling in his heart. So this Morrison chap is the reason for Roxanne's sudden change of attitude? And why are they going upstairs together? What are they trying to do? "Mr. Farwell," the business partner called out warily. Lucian turned around with a gloomy look all over his face. The other party shuddered subconsciously, but still plucked up his courage to hand Lucian the agreement. Lucian scanned it and penned his signature. The more he thought about Roxan, the angrier he felt. Just as the business partner was about to say something, Lucian turned around coldly and marched out of the banquet hall. Meanwhile, Roxan followed Larry into a room. As soon as they stepped in, Gerald could be seen sitting in the main seat. At the same time, Jasper and a few men, who seemed to be of high status, were gathered around him, laughing while talking about something. They fell silent instantly when they saw Roxan and Larry entering. Jasper got to his feet and introduced the duo to the others. "This is Dr. Jarvis, the doctor recommended by Mr. Queen." He then turned to Roxan and introduced, "These are the person in charge of the companies we will be discussing the collaboration with." Roxan had a rough guess about the men's identity. She greeted the crowd, looking neither humble nor arrogant, and apologized, "I'm sorry for making all of you wait." Gerald waved dismissively. "We were just sitting around and waiting anyway. It's nothing to worry about. Instead, you must be worried sick on the way here. I told them to not give you a call, but they insisted." Since Gerald had said so, the others too chimed in, saying that they did not mind the wait. Jasper clearly had a good relationship with Gerald. When the former heard Gerald's complaint, he smiled and said, "I was just informing her about your presence. I didn't mean to rush her." Gerald merely laughed. Roxan, too, smiled and followed Larry to find a place to sit. Soon, Jasper took the initiative to begin the conversation about the collaboration. Hence, Roxan briefly explained the business proposal she had discussed with Colby. Surprisingly, Jasper agreed without hesitation and waited for the others to respond. However, the others appeared a little hesitant. Roxan could not help but feel nervous. Just as she was getting anxious, Gerald's voice rang in the air. He gazed at Roxan apologetically. "I've heard the news about your research institute. I've always wanted to help, but I really don't have the power to do so. Though my words still have power, I'm just an academician. I'm clueless about the business world. I'm afraid no one will be convinced by me even if I speak up for you." The moment those words left his mouth, the expressions of everyone in the room changed. Although Gerald focused on academics, the others in the room had business dealings in the medical industry. Many of them relied on Gerald's skills for a living. Gerald's words might sound like he was merely apologizing to Roxan, but he was actually pressuring the others. Naturally, Roxan understood the meaning Gerald was implying. She returned his gaze with a look of gratitude. It did not take long for the rest to agree. Clearly Gerald's words worked. I've heard Mr. Queen talking about how impressive Dr. Jarvis' skills are. And now we've witnessed how Mr. Lynch admires Dr. Jarvis. I guess there's no reason for us to hesitate anymore. I never thought Dr. Jarvis would be so young and a woman too. Not only that, but she also even runs a research institute on her own. She's such a strong woman. Words of praise kept traveling into her ears. Of course, Roxanne knew they were only praising her for the sake of Jonathan and Gerald. Regardless, it meant that the collaboration was sealed. At that thought, Roxanne patiently thanked them for their praises. As the organizer of the banquet, Jasper could not keep staying in the room. Before leaving, he asked Roxanne, "Would you like to come with me, Dr. Jarvis? I can introduce you to the people involved in Summerbank's medical industry." Roxanne accepted the offer, got up, and excused herself from Gerald's presence before returning to the banquet hall with Jasper. Larry, on the other hand, stayed back to keep Gerald company. It was evident that Jasper was quite influential in the medical industry of Summerbank. As soon as he made an appearance, many people approached to greet him. Jasper returned their greetings and introduced Roxanne to them. After socializing for some time, Roxanne felt a little tired. Thus she excused herself to get some rest. Jasper smiled and nodded in agreement, taking her to the couch at the corner of the hall before returning to the crowd. When she finally settled down, Roxanne instinctively scanned the crowd. She caught no sight of Lucian. It was when she retracted her gaze that she realized what she did. Immediately an odd feeling rose in her heart. She, too, had no idea why she looked for him subconsciously. Maybe I'm just worried he'll come looking for me again. Roxanne convinced herself, despite feeling conflicted. Suddenly a shadow appeared in front of her. For some reason, Roxanne tensed up, thinking what she feared had actually happened. There were traces of panic on her face when she lifted her head. When she caught sight of the person in front of her, she calmed down and spoke slowly. "Who are you?" A big and tall man stood in front of her. His broad figure seemed to be enough to cover her completely. Realizing she was looking at him, the man smiled, raised his glass at her, and introduced himself. "Hello. I'm Joseph Cadman, the youngest son of the Cadman family. May I have the honor of making your acquaintance?" The Cadman family was a relatively reputable family in Summerbank. Hence, Joseph did not bother revealing much about himself. He merely stared at the woman in front of him confidently after stating his request. He was a little late to the event. By the time he spotted Roxanne, she was being brought around the hall by Jasper to meet the guests. He eavesdropped on some of their conversations. Roxanne's beauty and outstanding skills left an itch in his heart. When he saw her sitting on the couch alone, he rushed over eagerly. Alas, Roxanne was not familiar with Summerbank's influential organizations. On top of that, she had scared herself with her own speculations. Thus, she was in no mood to socialize. Upon hearing Joseph's words, she put on a distant smile, saying, "I'm sorry. I'm only here to settle some work matters. I'll be leaving soon. I might not have the time to make friends." Joseph's face fell when he heard her rejection, and his tone sounded insistent. "I think you've misunderstood my intentions. I don't mean that kind of friendship." Roxanne frowned in confusion, not understanding what he meant. Joseph smirked mysteriously. "A one night should be enough for us to get to know each other." That sentence had clearly displayed his intentions. Roxanne was momentarily stunned, but she quickly realized what he was saying. Her expression turned frosty. "I'm not interested. Please stop disturbing me. I want to be alone for a while." Joseph scowled at her second rejection. Unfortunately, there were too many people at the banquet. Thus he could not do anything to her. Instead, he straightened his body unhappily and lifted his wineglass toward her. With a threatening tone, he said, "If that's the case, surely you won't refuse this toast, right?" Roxan appeared hesitant. Joseph was obviously a notorious playboy, and she did not know if he would pull any tricks on her. Sensing her concern, Joseph mocked, "Oh, you can relax. There are so many people here. I won't do anything to you. I'm not the kind who'll force women into doing things anyway." Roxan frowned but still clinked her glass with his, taking a sip out of politeness. Joseph shot her a dangerous glance and returned to the crowd. When she saw him leaving, Roxan secretly sighed with relief. As soon as Joseph returned to the crowd, a group of playboys surrounded him, teasing, "Yeah. There are still women who don't fall for Mr. Cadman's flirts, eh? Who is that woman? Why is she so arrogant?" Joseph shot the man a glare. Someone reminded, "I heard she came with that Mr. Farwell of Hington. We'd better not mess with her." As soon as the speaker finished his sentence, Joseph smacked the former's head. "A Mr. Farwell is already engaged. Why would he come with this woman? Besides, it means nothing even if they come together. Mr. Ziegler's the one who brought her here to socialize with the guests. That's enough to prove that she has nothing special with Mr. Farwell." Hearing that, the person who spoke up hesitated but nodded in agreement. What are you planning to do then?" "She has ignored you," someone asked. Joseph downed his drink and said fiercely, "She'd better not leave this banquet hall. I, Joseph Cadman, never let my target run away just like that." The others bobbed their heads in agreement. Meanwhile, Roxan was totally unaware of the danger she was about to face. She had too much to drink earlier while socializing with Jasper. After sitting down for a while, she got to her feet, feeling the need to go to the washroom. Seeing her leave the banquet hall, Joseph and the other playboys sneakily followed her. Roxan noticed nothing and entered the washroom. When she stepped out of the facility, she was blocked by a few playboys at the washroom's entrance. Roxan was slightly taken aback by the situation. What a coincidence, Ms. Jarvis." Joseph smiled casually while striding toward her. Roxan frowned and eyed them warily, warning, "Mr. Cadman, I'm Mr. Ziegler's guest. Please watch your actions." Joseph raised his brow casually. "I know, but so what? Mr. Ziegler's not with you now. I dare you to get him over. I'll leave right away if he shows up." Naturally, Roxan could not do so. She could only step backward silently, trying to maintain a safe distance between them. Why don't you ask them? There is no woman in Summerbank who would dare to disrespect MC, Joseph said as he inched closer to Roxan. There was a look of disdain in his eyes as he stared at the woman in front of him. "You should feel honored that I'm talking to you, but yet here you are, trying to brush me off. Do you really think that you can get away with it just because you have a pretty face? Don't forget that you are now in Summerbank." Roxan willed herself to calm down. After glancing at the men behind Joseph, who were all staring at her, she decided to swallow her pride. "That was not what I can't. However, if you want to be friends, you can just tell me directly. I wouldn't dare to be friends with you if you bring so many people along. I'll be afraid." Joseph thought that Roxan finally got the hint, for he turned around to shoot his friends a look. The group of men instantly retreated. However, they still looked at Joseph and Roxan with a look of anticipation. Soon enough, only Roxan and Joseph were left standing face to face. Joseph's gaze shamelessly wandered around Roxan's body. Roxan curled her fingers into a light fist as she resisted the urge to vomit. She forced a smile onto her face while walking backward calmly. She was trying to lure Joseph away from the other's lint of vision. Once she managed to get Joseph alone, she would be able to take a chance and strike him. If Roxan could strike him on his acupuncture points, Joseph would not have any energy to retaliate. With that she could escape. It would have been hard for her to outtack him when there were so many people around. Just as she was about to turn the corner, a wail sounded from the crowd standing outside. Everyone was stunned at the sudden shout and turned around to look in the direction of the sound. All that could be seen was a young man who had been standing at head of the group, flying through the air and falling down to the floor in front of the crowd. When the crowd noticed what had happened, they moved aside to make way. Roxanne's gaze instantly landed on the man who was walking through the crowd. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. He had once again caught her at her worst. Who is it?" Joseph roared, wanting to get revenge on behalf of one of his friends who had been attacked. He had already turned around to witness his friends sent flying through the air. However, when Joseph noticed the man walking over, he vaguely thought that the latter looked familiar. Regardless, he was unable to recall who he was. In spite of that, Joseph was slightly intimidated by the man's domineering aura. If it weren't for his many friends observing this every move, Joseph probably would have already scurried away. Lucian's dark gaze latched onto the woman standing now far away from him. He did not even spare Joseph a glance. Lucian had been searching for Roxan on the upper floor for a long time, but to no avail. He was about to return to the banquet hall on the lower floor to search for her when he heard the commotion as well as a crowd of people standing in the corner. As Lucian walked nearer to the crowd, he instantly saw Roxan smiling at an unfamiliar man. When he noticed the smile on her face, fury instantly crept within him. It was absurd how Roxan was willing to smile at such a lewd man when she only had a distant look on her face whenever she was around Lucian. Lucian had decided to see how far Roxan was willing to go when whispers sounded next to him. "A look at her amazing body. Joseph is going to have a good time tonight." Hearing that, rage surged up in Lucian's heart as his expression darkened. The man who said those words suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Before he could even react, he was already sent flying through the air with a kick. Fury was evident on Lucian's face. Roxan only glanced at Lucian briefly before looking away. She did not have the courage to continue looking at him. Even the smile on her face started to drop. Guessing that her actions should have been noticed by Lucian, Roxan's heart was filled with regret. She was only trying to get away from Joseph, but Lucian would probably get the wrong idea from her actions. As Joseph noticed Lucian getting nearer to them, he glanced at his friends who were standing not far away. Joseph sealed himself and stood in front of Lucian. "Do you know this woman?" Lucian slowly came to a stop as his gaze motionlessly swept over the man in front of him before returning to Roxan's face. Woman in question had cast her gaze downward and her lips were pursed. She did not seem to want his help at all. Noticing her reaction, Lucian felt like he was being mocked. Even at this stage, was Roxan still trying to avoid him? Since that was her wish, Lucian would grant it. Upon thinking of that, Lucian looked away. "I don't know her." Joseph inwardly heaved a sigh of relief when he heard those words. The man on the floor scrambled to get up. He pointed at Lucian's back and exclaimed, "Why did you kick me?" His voice was full of anger. Lucian only shot him a cold look. The man on the floor suddenly felt a chill run up his spine. He ripped his mouth sheepishly. It was after a while that Lucian replied in a cold voice, "You were in my way." The man who had been kicked opened his mouth indignantly. However, he did not dare to say much, for he knew he was no match for Lucian. Thus he walked back. Lucian turned to look at Joseph. "Please continue," he said, although his tone seemed like he was commanding Joseph instead. As soon as Lucian spoke, both Roxan and Joseph's expressions changed. Roxan never expected Lucian to say something like that. Surprise flashed across her eyes, clenched her fists, suppressing the urge to look at him. She refused to believe that Lucian meant what he said. Joseph, on the other hand, looked at Lucian in doubt. He frowned at the latter. If Lucian had not appeared, Joseph would definitely have continued. However, now that there was a domineering man looking from the side, there was no way he would be able to continue his act. Yet that domineering man's eyes seemed to be boring holes into Joseph. It seemed like if Joseph did not continue, that man would not leave. I bet he was lying about not knowing her. Nevertheless, Joseph submitted to Lucian's domineering pressure and turned back to face Roxan. He slowly walked toward her. Roxan had originally thought of a plan to handle Joseph, but Lucian's gaze unknowingly made her panic. Looking at the man inching nearer to her, Roxan's pupils constricted, and she instinctively took a step backward. She then raised her hand and slapped Joseph. The crisp sound of a slap rang in everyone's ears. The young men who were standing not far away were stunned at what happened. Joseph's eyes widened. He did not manage to react as he was oppressed by Lucian's domineering aura. "How dare she hit me?" He quickly snapped back to reality and glanced at Lucian. The latter's expression did not change. It seemed like Lucian did not plan on leaving. At once, Joseph's expression darkened. He roared, "How dare you hit me?" He took a large step toward Roxan and raised his hand to hit her. Roxan subconsciously closed her eyes lightly. However, that hand never came into contact with her skin. There wasn't even any sound. After a while, Roxan slowly opened her eyes and noticed an arm stretched across her. Lucian's large hand had grabbed onto Joseph's wrist, stopping him. Joseph, who was still standing in front of Roxan, gritted his teeth silently. His face had turned ashen. Although the one whom Roxan had slapped was Joseph, Lucian seemed to have been shaken. He finally realized what he had done. He then saw that Joseph was about to hit Roxan. All of the suppressed rage and guilt coupled within him as the aura around him became even more terrifying than before. When Joseph's wrist was grabbed by Lucian, he was about to scold the latter when he squinted his eyes. Joseph instantly shut his mouth. Even though Joseph's wrist felt like it was about to snap at any second, all he could do was break into a cold sweat. He didn't even dare to make a sound at all. Realizing that Lucian had stopped Joseph in the end, Roxan somehow felt relief and she calmed down. When she recalled how cold and indifferent Lucian was seconds ago and how angry he looked right now, Roxan found it ironic. Maybe in Lucian's eyes, Roxan's current state would change according to what he wanted. She was nothing but a toy for him to play around with. Upon thinking of that, Roxan mulled herself in her mind and curled her lips into a deprecating smile. She deduced as no longer funny the chaos happening in front of her and made a move to leave. However, just as she turned around, a large hand reached out to grab her wrist. Roxan did not need to turn her head around to know who stopped her. She glued at her wrist that was in his grip and said, "Have you had your fun, Mr. Farwell? Please let me go." The moment she spoke those words, the expressions of the crowd instantly changed. All of them had only heard of Lucian and occasionally saw him on television. That was the reason why they found Lucian familiar when they first saw him. However, it did not cross their mind that he was actually Lucian Farwell. As a result, they offended someone who was connected to Lucian. Once that thought crossed their minds, panic expressions could be seen on all of their faces. Joseph's wrist was still in Lucian's grip. He was experiencing pain. How oppressing Lucian's domineering aura was, his back was thoroughly drenched in sweat. If he had known that Roxan was with Lucian, he would never have even glanced at her. "Mr. Farwell, this is just a misunderstanding," Joseph stammered, trying to plead for himself. However, Lucian did not even spare him a glance. He was staring fixedly at Roxan's back. Is she trying to escape to look for Morrison again? Roxan frowned when she realized that Lucian was not going to let go of her. She turned around to look at the latter with mockery in her eyes. Aren't you done, Mr. Farwell? Are you still waiting for me to continue with this show? Upon asking, she looked at Joseph, who was still being restrained by Lucian, in disdain. Her words meant that she would be willing to go along with Joseph if Lucian wanted the show to continue. When Joseph met her gaze, beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. This is a huge misunderstanding. Miss Jarvis. I only wanted to be friends with you. I really didn't have any other motives. You are with Mr. Farwell after all. I don't have the guts to. Roxan cut him off by nodding. You're right. You only want to be my friend for the night, Mr. Cadman. If Mr. Farwell wants to see that, I can only obey his request. The atmosphere around them instantly became tense at her words. Lucian narrowed his eyes as he looked at the woman in front of him. Joseph also noticed the murderous intent in the aura surrounding them. He shivered uncontrollably. The Cadman family of Summerbank? Lucian's cold voice rang next to his ears. Joseph nodded instinctively. However, he quickly understood the reason behind Lucian's question and promptly shook his head. With narrowed eyes, Lucian let go of Joseph's wrist with a stoic expression. I get lost. When Joseph thought of the possible retaliation that the Cadman family might face after the incident, his face filled with terror. He tried to explain himself, Mr. Farwell, I really did not do it on purpose. I didn't know she was your woman. Besides, as you saw for yourself, I didn't do anything to her. The more Joseph tried to explain, the angrier Lucian got. His eyes darkened terrifyingly. When Joseph noticed Lucian's gaze, he instantly shut up. After remaining at the same spot for a few seconds, he turned around and ordered everyone to leave, feeling dejected. It seemed that the Cadman family would soon fall from grace. Once Joseph and the crowd scurried away, only Lucian and Roxan were left in the corridor. Roxanne's wrist was still in Lucian's grip. Realizing that he did not seem to be releasing her any time soon, Roxan was not annoyed at all. She merely said in a calm voice, Everyone's gone. You can let go of me now, Mr. Farwell. I won't run away. Lucian stared at her for a few seconds before slowly relaxing his grip. Roxanne's eyebrow furrowed as she rubbed her aching wrist. She took 2 steps backward and looked up at Lucian. Is there anything else, Mr. Farwell? Lucian frowned upon hearing that he had saved her, but she did not even thank him for it. Instead, she had asked him if there was anything else. I've helped you out again, and this is your attitude toward me? Lucian's tone was laced with coldness. Roxanne's lips curled mockingly. Help? If you really wanted to help me, you wouldn't have said those words to Joseph. You're only using me for your own bench, there's no need to sugarcoat your actions. The air around them seemed to still at the tension between them. Lucian's eyes were burning with rage. However, when he recalled the words he had spoken on impulse, he could not say anything to justify himself. After being plunged into silence for a while, Roxan took his lack of response as a silent agreement. The trackery on her face made more evident as she nodded at him. Seems like you have had your fun. Mr. Farwell. I think I should leave now. With that, she turned around to leave. Just then, Lucian's low voice rang from behind her. Where's Morrison? Roxan stopped and looked back in confusion. What? Didn't you compromise with me just so you could meet him? Why didn't he come to save you earlier? Lucian narrowed his eyes as he scrutinized her. Roxan took a few seconds to realize that Lucian was referring to Larry. What does this have to do with Larry? Noticing the confused look on her face, Lucian explained, You arrived at the banquet together with me, and then you left with Mr. Morrison. I heard that Mr. Ziegler has been bringing you around to socialize with other people as well. In just a short time you have been with 3 different men. You are indeed popular with men, Miss Jarvis. Lucian then scanned her from head to toe and added in a bitter tone, "Oh, right. There's also that man just now. Your popularity is far beyond my expectations." Knowing that Lucian had deliberately brought Joseph up to annoy her, Roxanne's expression darkened. "You were spying on me?" She was only with Larry for a few minutes. During that time, Lucian should have been socializing with other clients. There was no way he could have noticed them. Unless the said clients did not exist. Upon that thought, Roxanne found herself feeling suspicious and doubtful. "You are a woman who stands out in a crowd, Ms. Jarvis. Couple that with the fact you appeared at the banquet together with me and people will definitely talk about you. Would I even need to spy on you? Or did you think that you are somewhat important to me and that I would send someone to spy on you, Ms. Jarvis?" Lucian scoffed. His words insinuated that Roxanne was deluding herself. Roxanne's eyes twitched as a wave of self-depreciation washed over her. "He's right. Considering the intent of my relationship with Lucian, I'm not important enough to be spied on. He probably only saw me with Larry by accident." Moreover, when she appeared at the banquet with Lucian, they had indeed stirred up a commotion. His theory was not impossible. Upon thinking of that, Roxanne slowly calmed down. She cast her gaze downward as she said in an emotionless tone, "If that's the case, I have wronged you, Mr. Farwell. However, with how you treated me earlier, I think we are even now." Lucian only felt annoyed and frustrates all her attitude. "Archie and Benny are waiting for you at home. Please take care of yourself, Ms. Jarvis." Roxanne did not want to continue the convention further. She said lightly, "Thank you for your reminder, Mr. Farwell." Both of them looked at each other, their eyes filled with emotions. Then Lucian looked away and turned around to leave the hotel with furrowed eyebrows. He had only attended the banquet because of Roxanne. However, he did not want to stay there a second longer because of her attitude toward him. Looking at his retreating figure, Roxanne frowned slightly. Suspicion rose in her heart once again. Did he attend the banquet for work? Why is he leaving right now? She nearly thought that Lucian had left because of her. But recalling what he had told her, she didn't want to seclude herself further. She looked away and returned to the banquet hall. Joseph and the others were nowhere to be seen. The moment Roxanne entered the hall, Jasper instantly caught sight of her. "Where did you go?" "I've been looking for you for hours," Jasper asked in concern as he walked up to her the moment Roxanne walked in. "Feeling a bit slutty in here, so went outside for a walk," she responded. Jasper heaved a sigh of relief. "Thank goodness you're okay. You're my guest. And if anything were to happen to you, I wouldn't know what to tell Mr. Queen and Mr. Lynch." After what had happened just now, Roxanne was starting to feel tired. Seemed that there was nothing to be concerned about. She replied, "I'm fine. Just a little tired about the collaboration." Jasper instantly answered, "Let's meet at my office tomorrow morning. All you need to do is bring the contract. Go home if you're feeling tired. It's already a big honor that you can attend the banquet today." Roxanne smiled at him gratefully. After bidding him goodbye, she went to the upper floor to send Gerald her regards. Larry was currently keeping Gerald company. Hearing that Roxanne was about to leave, Gerald turned to Larry with a meaningful look in his eyes. "I'm getting tired too. You don't have to accompany me anymore. It's not safe for Roxanne to go home alone when it's so late at night. Send her home, will you?" Larry smiled and agreed. Roxanne instantly thought of Lucian's words from earlier and a weird feeling rose in her heart. Alas, it was too late to reject. Larry had already walked over to her. Let's go." Gerald smiled at both of them. After the medical conference, Gerald found out that both Roxanne and Larry were single. Therefore, he had been trying to find an opportunity to set them up. When he saw the both of them standing next to each other, he could not help but feel that they were made for each other. Since Roxanne had missed the opportunity to reject his offer, she could only silently agree to it. After bidding Gerald goodbye, she walked out of the hotel with Larry in tow. It was already well into the night when they exited the hotel. As Roxanne was wearing a dress that exposed her shoulders, she shivered when a gust of wind blew past her. The next second, a warm coat was draped over her shoulders. "Put it on. My car is parked slightly further away. You're wearing too little. It won't be good if you get sick." Larry's gentle voice rang next to her ear. After a brief moment of hesitation, Roxanne smiled and said, "Thanks, Larry." She had always been on good terms with Larry. If she were to reject his kindness because of a sentence from Lucian, it would seem as though there was something between her and Larry. With that thought in mind, Roxanne pulled the coat around herself and walked to the car with Larry. In the car opposite the main road, the driver noticed the sudden change in atmosphere. His palms started sweating as the air surrounding them seemed to have dropped by a few degrees. It was after a long time that Lucian stopped looking at the entrance to the hotel. "Let's go back," he ordered in a cold voice. The driver acknowledged his instructions and started the engine, driving toward the hotel that Lucian was staying at. Roxanne had no idea that Lucian had seen her. She opened the door to the passenger seat and got into Larry's car. The moment she entered the car, she politely took off Larry's coat and placed it in the back seat. After getting the address to her hotel, Larry revved up the engine. Both of them remained silent for the entire journey. Roxanne looked out the window to stare at the scenery outside and soon fell into deep thought. She couldn't understand Lucian's attitude earlier at all. "You just left like that. What about Mr. Farwell?" Larry suddenly asked. Roxanne only returned to her senses after a long while. Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "What does it have to do with him?" Larry looked at her through the rearview mirror. "Mr. Farwell brought you to the banquet, right?" Although Roxanne had said that she met Lucian in the lobby, Larry managed to figure out the truth when he realized that Roxanne did not drive. Roxanne was stunned. She turned around and met Larry's eyes. Roxanne pressed her lips into a smile and replied, "You're right, but we only met by chance at the boutique. It's not what you think it is." Larry nodded. "Does Mr. Farwell know that you left?" "That man left even before I did." "How would he know when I left?" "I'm not sure," she replied dismissively, then quickly changed the topic. Oh, right, what were you doing at the banquet, Larry?" Larry knew that she did not want to talk about it, and thus he did not press any further. "Mr. Ziegler sent me an invitation. I didn't want to attend, but I found out that Mr. Lynch was in Summerbank as well. I figured he would attend the banquet, so I came over. I never thought I would run into you." Roxanne nodded absent-mindedly. "How are things at the Research Institute?" Larry asked caringly. "I went to the banquet to discuss the matters at the Research Institute. Mr. Ziegler and the others have a branch in Hington that can work together with us. We've already discussed it and will be signing the contract tomorrow. I will head home once that's done." Larry furrowed his brows. "How did you find Mr. Ziegler?" As far as he knew, Roxanne had been looking for a partner in Hington. However, Jasper was all the way in Summerbank. Larry was curious as to how they managed to get in touch with each other. Moreover, Jasper seemed to think very highly of Roxanne. "Mr. Queen introduced us to each other. Speaking of which, I need to thank him for his help," Roxanne said. Upon hearing that it was because of Jonathan, Larry nodded in response. A Queen Group does have a good relationship with Ziegler Group. But it seems that Queen Group has a better relationship with Farwell Group. Now that Mr. Queen has helped to introduce you to Ziegler Group, he has inevitably stood against Farwell Group. If Mrs. Farwell finds out about this, things may not end well." Roxanne frowned upon hearing that. She was worried for Jonathan. Although Jonathan had said that they would not be noticed by Farwell Group, both of them knew that there would still be a risk that his decision to help Roxanne would be discovered by Farwell Group. Regardless, Roxanne had already gone this far. She did not want to give up so easily. After all, Sonia's aim was to chase her away. Once she solved all the problems related to the research institute and left Hington, she reckoned Sonia would probably stop going after her. The car gradually came to a stop in front of the hotel. After bidding Larry goodbye, Roxanne got out of the car and headed into the building. When the next morning rolled around, Roxanne went to Jasper's office to sign the contract at the scheduled time. Once that was done, Roxanne boarded the flight back home. The moment she sat down in her seat, her nerves, which had been on an edge, finally relaxed. Upon arriving at her destination, all she needed to do left was to observe how things were going to proceed. Once she made sure that the supplies given by the few companies were stable, Roxanne could finally leave the country in peace. Just as she was deep in thought, someone sat down in the seat next to her. Roxanne came back to her senses and glanced at the person next to her. When she realized who it was, her expression stiffened. "Are you going to think that I'm stalking you again, Ms. Jarvis?" Lucian's tone was filled with mockery as he quirked an eyebrow. "If you are uncomfortable, would you like me to switch seats with someone else?" Roxanne balled her fists to suppress the displeasure in her heart. "Don't bother. I wouldn't make such a request to a stranger either," she replied emotionlessly. With that, she turned away from Lucian and leaned back against her seat. Recalling what he had seen outside the banquet hall that night and noticing how Roxanne was treating him on the plane, Lucian grew angry all of a sudden. "Why are you by yourself, Ms. Jarvis? Where's Mr. Morrison? Why isn't he with you?" At the mention of Larry's name, Roxanne sat upright and looked at Lucian in discontentment. "There's nothing between Larry and me. Please refrain from speaking nonsense, Mr. Farwell." Lucian snorted. Why did you assume I thought there was something between the both of you?" Roxanne parted her lips, but she did not know how to respond to his question. Instead, she fell back into her seat indignantly and pulled her blanket up to her face. She no longer wanted to pay any attention to the person next to her. What is his problem? As far as I know, Larry has barely ever interacted with Lucian, yet Lucian keeps going after him. Lucian's eyes turned cold when he noticed that she was annoyed. He was just about to say something when a flight attendant walked toward them. He frowned and suppressed the rage within him, keeping his words to himself. The plane soon took off. Roxanne was lying stiffly on her side facing the window. During the flight, she heard the flight attendants walking over a few times to ask if they needed anything, and Lucian rejected the flight attendants coldly every time. Roxanne was definitely not about to turn around to face Lucian. However, every time the flight attendant left, his gaze would land on her. All Roxanne felt was discomfort when that happened. Just as Lucian's eyes settled on her once again, Roxanne flung the blanket off and sat upright. She was about to open her mouth to say something when Lucian beat her to it. As she said that we are expected to be hit with turbulence and the airplane might shake violently. The words that Roxanne was about to say ended up being caught in her throat. There was a look of confusion on her face. However, before she could react, the airplane started to jolt. Roxanne, having lost her balance, accidentally lurched toward Lucian before her seatbelt pulled her back. She had just settled back into her seat when shouts and sounds of queries could be heard around her. What's going on? Will the plane be able to land safely? Are we going to die? It was the passengers' first time encountering something like this, and they were understandably nervous. Through the speaker, a flight attendant explained to the passengers the reason behind the sudden jerk. She also tried to calm the passengers down. However, just as she managed to calm everyone down, the plane jerked again. This time it was more violent than before. Welcome to NarrativeNook Audio Tales, where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.